Chapter 12, the Caliphate. Our big question today. How did people in the remote region of Arabia defeat two mighty empires? The first caliph, Abu Bakr. Muhammad died 20 years after he began preaching his message. Many of his community of believers had only recently converted, and their loyalty was not always strong. It was not clear if Islam would survive. There needed to be a successor to Muhammad, and fast. The important people of Medina, which remained the most central city after Muhammad's death, met in private. When they emerged, they announced that Abu Bakr would be the caliph, or successor, meaning Muhammad's successor. Muhammad had many children, all of whom died during his lifetime, except for Fatima, wife of Ali. He also had a large extended family. After the death of his first wife, Khadijah, he had married again several times. Abu Bakr was Muhammad's father-in-law by his wife Aisha. We will hear more of Aisha later. He was one of Muhammad's closest friends and known to be a wise and strong man. Abu Bakr had an immediate and difficult task. Many tried to leave Islam after Muhammad's death, or stop paying taxes to the new Muslim leader. Abu Bakr fought many battles with people who wished to secede. Abu Bakr was successful for two reasons. First, he was a great military leader. Second, he was a great preacher himself. The story was that he had convinced six of his friends to become Muslims within 1 hour after he himself had converted. Abu Bakr turned his former enemies into committed Muslims. Eager to follow his lead, they became part of a formidable military force. He continued the campaign that Muhammad had begun, and within 2 years of Muhammad's death, the Muslim ruled the entire Arabian Peninsula and had started campaigns to conquer Syria and Iraq. Arabia became truly united. It had always been a mix of Bedouin tribes, towns, and small countries, often ignored or exploited by the Byzantine and Persian empires. Now it was a power in its own right. The second caliph, Umar. Abu Bakr died just 2 years after becoming the first caliph. On his deathbed, he nominated his successor, Umar, a close colleague of Muhammad's and his father-in-law's as well. Muhammad had married Umar's daughter, Hafsa. The story of Umar's conversion to Islam. Umar had an interesting past. He had been an enemy of Muhammad's before converting to Islam. Umar was a well-traveled and literate man, born to a powerful family in Mecca. He had a reputation for being hard and sometimes cruel. At first, he hated Muhammad's message and was one of the worst persecutors of the early Muslims. The legend is that in 616 CE, 3 years after Muhammad began converting people in Mecca, Umar decided to have him assassinated. Striding towards Muhammad's house, he met a passerby who told him that Umar's own sister, Fatima, had converted to Islam. Furious, Umar changed direction and rushed to Fatima's house. He burst in, and his sister hurriedly hid the paper she had been reading. He shouted at her and demanded to see what she was reading. Angry at herself, Fatima told him it was the Quran and that he was too impure to touch it. He grabbed the Quran and began to read. Immediately he started weeping and converted to Islam on the spot. He became one of Muhammad's closest allies. Umar was a political genius. He established one of the greatest empires in history, winning battles and expanding that empire at an even faster rate than Muhammad and Abu Bakr had. He also put structures in place to keep the empire strong. He appointed regional governors to the places he conquered, and required them to live in a humble way. Their doors had to remain open to the people. Umar himself is believed to have led a very simple life. He lived in a small home and wore inexpensive clothes. If he felt officials were flaunting their wealth, he had them dismissed. He created a special department that would investigate complaints about state officials. If they were found guilty, they could be flogged. Umar also created a taxation system for the new Islamic empire. All Muslims had to pay a tax of 2% of their earnings to help the poor and the needy. Non-Muslims also had to pay a tax. Umar used these taxes, among other things, to help the unemployed and the elderly. just as many governments today use taxes to support people in need. Umar was not only a political genius, but a military one. In his 10 years as caliph, he fought many wars. With his greatest generals, Abu Ubaidah and Khalid, he devastated the great Byzantine and Persian empires. In 636 and 637, two decisive battles were fought that led to the Muslims conquering huge portions of Byzantine territory and breaking the Persian Empire completely. By his death in 644, just 12 years after Muhammad's own death, Umar had captured much of the Persian Empire. He had moved through Syria and into Egypt. He had taken the great cities of Damascus and Jerusalem from the Byzantines. Politics, not religion. The Muslims conquered many lands, but they did not force Jews and Christians to convert. They recognized the common roots of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Some Christians and Jews were attracted to Muhammad's message and did choose to convert, but this happened over a long time. Christians and Jews did pay higher taxes than poor Muslims, but less than under the Persians or Byzantines. In general, they were treated better in the first Islamic empires than they had been under earlier empires, and often preferred living in Islamic lands. The Battle of Yarmouk, an introduction. The Byzantines largely ignored the Muslims until Umar conquered the great city of Damascus in 635. It was then that the emperor Heraclius realized this new foe must be crushed. He raised a huge army from across his empire to drive the Muslims back into Arabia. The Muslims retreated and regrouped on the edge of the desert in modern day Jordan. And then they met the Byzantine forces on the plains overlooking the Yarmouk River Valley, northeast of Jerusalem. The Battle of Yarmouk was one of the great turning points in history. The Muslims the Muslim army defeated a much larger, technologically superior force through strategy and determination. Umar had appointed a great general to lead his troops against the Byzantine army, Abu Ubaidah, who was assisted by another savvy general, Khalid. This is a fictionalized story of General Vahan, the leader of the Byzantine troops, and his experience through the long Battle of Yarmouk. The Battle of Yarmouk. General Vahan was confident. The loss of territory to the newly united Arabs had been an unbearable humiliation for the Byzantine Empire. He was proud that Emperor Heraclius had given him, his greatest general, 80,000 troops to crush the new Muslim army. In the past few weeks he had swept through Syria, and the Muslims had retreated before him. Now was his chance to end their expansion. 25,000 Muslim troops were gathered before him on the Yarmouk plains. Deep ravines with rushing waters surrounded them. There were few ways to escape. Not that escaping should be necessary for the Byzantines. Vahan's army was larger, more experienced, and had superior technology. There was little doubt of victory. Vahan watched his army train. Infantrymen jogged up and down under the watch of a steely-eyed officer, holding their spears and shields aloft. In battle, they would form a perfect barrier, preventing any of the enemy from attacking the troops within. Behind them, the rest of the infantry would be sheltered, ready to throw javelins and shoot arrows at the enemy. Then there were the mighty cavalry. He could see them making crude jokes and jostling one another. Little could dent the arrogance of a cavalryman. Armed with lances, long swords, and short bows, they would be the key to crushing the enemy. They would charge at the Moslem soldiers, shooting arrows as they advanced. Then they would crash into them with their battle trained horses, scattering men left and right. Finally, there were the champions, seasoned officers and warriors. They would begin the battle by fighting duels to the death against their Muslim opponents. General Vahan knew many would die, but those who succeeded would strike fear into the hearts of the other soldiers. The Byzantine soldiers were as diverse as the empire itself. People from Armenia, Syria, Egypt, Greece, the Balkans, and more. They were also unstoppable. At least they should be. Vahan suppressed a twinge of doubt. His soldiers were tired after fighting the Persians for so many years. Still, Vahan believed victory would be within reach. Day 1. The battle began as was the tradition with the dueling of the champions. Bahan was surprised at the number of champions the Muslims managed to slay. Still, it had been a fruitful day. Bahan had tested the Muslim lines with his army and now understood their strength and formation. He had a plan. Now the real battle began. Bahan launched a major attack with cavalry and infantry striking hard at the center of Muslim forces. He attacked before dawn, when the Muslims would be praying. But the Muslim general Abu Ubaidah was prepared for this stratagem. He was ready to meet the Byzantines on the battlefield. Abu Ubaidah may have seen through Bahan's ploy, but he was still overwhelmed by the Byzantines' numbers. Soon the Muslims' right flank collapsed. The soldiers fled back to their camps. Bahan watched with satisfaction. Suddenly he saw the Moslem soldiers returning. Sure it was a trick, he shouted for a messenger to discover what was happening. When the messenger returned, panting and breathless, he told an astonishing story. The Moslem women in the camps were furious with their husbands for fleeing the battle. They charged at them with tent poles, threw rocks at them, and sang songs of betrayal. Their fury had forced their husbands back into battle. Bahan was amazed, but carried on with the attack. This time he pushed on the left flank. Again the Moslem soldiers fled, only to be pushed back into the battle by their wives. Thwarted, Bahan retired to sleep. His dreams were troubled. The day should have seen the destruction of the Moslem soldiers. Instead, little had been gained. Day 3. Bahan tried a new strategy, pushing hardest on the right flank to break it apart from the main Muslim army. Yet again, the soldiers retreated, only for their wives to push them back into the fray. But while Bahan was concentrating on the right flank, Abu Ubaidah ordered Khalid to sneak around and attack Bahan's own left side. Khalid's mobile guard, his best soldiers, caused havoc. The battle descended into bloody fighting, with many dying on both sides. By nightfall, the Byzantines had still made no progress. Day 4. Bahan decided to repeat the previous day's strategy. The Muslim right flank had been damaged and with one more hammer blow should collapse. Once again the Muslims fell back under his attack, but once again Abu Ubaidah outwitted him. In a three-pronged maneuver, the Muslims' mobile guard attacked the flanks of the Byzantine army, while the cavalry attacked the front. The Byzantine army began to retreat. The Muslims ended the day with ground gained, but it had come at a huge cost. Already Bahan heard from his spies. The day was being called the Day of Lost Eyes in the Muslim camp. Huge numbers of Muslim soldiers had lost their sight to the Byzantine archers, and some of Abu Ubaidah's best officers had been killed. Day 5. Bahan had been fighting for 4 days against an inferior force. He had killed many, but many had died on his own side too. He had failed to gain any ground. Filled with self-loathing, but knowing it was necessary, he sent a courier to the Muslim camp offering a truce. After some hours, the courier came galloping back. "General," he gasped, "they have declined the truce. Battle will begin again tomorrow." For the first time, Bahan knew real fear. By offering a truce, he had signaled to the Muslims that he might lose. Now they would be excited and eager, believing they could win. He could be in trouble. Day 6. The sixth day of battle dawned. Bahan looked at his troops, seeing the worry in them that he tried to mask in his own face. As the fighting began, Bahan realized the Muslims had indeed gained confidence. They attacked in force, while Abu Ubaidah's mobile army galloped around and attacked the Byzantines from the left and the rear. The Byzantines' left wing collapsed. Bahan, seeing the disaster, tried to order his cavalry to respond, but he was too late. While the Byzantine cavalry were forming, Khalid attacked them. The cavalry fled to the north. Abu Ubaidah's mobile guard rejoined the other Muslim soldiers, continuing to destroy the Byzantine army's left wing. Bahan knew he was beaten in order to retreat. The Byzantines fled, only to find troops blocking them. As they scrambled, many fell into the deep ravines surrounding the plains, or dove into the waters, only to be smashed by the rocks below. Some soldiers did escape, including Bahan, but shortly afterward, Abu Ubaida's soldiers found them and fought them again near Damascus. This time Bahan was killed. At least he thought as he died, I will not see my emperor's face when he realizes his great empire has been broken. Uthman. In 644, Uthman was appointed Umar's successor. Like Abu Bakr and Umar, he had been a close companion of Muhammad's. He was also his son-in-law. Uthman had married two of Muhammad's daughters. Uthman continued to expand the Islamic empire, but his reign was more controversial than those of his predecessors. Some felt Uthman favored his own clan, the Umayyads, too much, and that he did not behave as a pious Muslim should. There were stories of lavish parties, of Uthman taking taxes from the people and spending the money for his own pleasure, on his family, and on his friends. Regardless of whether those stories were true, they convinced many. Uthman's enemies joined the cause of Muhammad's closest relative, Ali. Do you remember the sermon Muhammad delivered shortly before he died? The one where he spoke about his son in law, Ali? Ali and his family believed that Muhammad had meant Ali to be caliph. Ali and his family had accepted Abu Bakr and Umar as strong leaders. But under Uthman, their supporters' belief that Muhammad's direct relatives ought to be caliphs resurfaced. Ali was also Muhammad's cousin. Uthman was assassinated in 656, leading to the first great crisis for the new Islamic empire. The codification of the Quran. In one of Abu Bakr's early battles, around 700 Muslims who had memorized the Quran were killed. Until that time, the Quran mostly existed in people's memories. Muhammad had recited the Quran to his followers, some of whom wrote parts of it down. After that battle, Abu Bakr was afraid that the knowledge of the Quran would be lost through future deaths. Although some written copies existed, he was not confident in their accuracy. He ordered a copy to be compiled that he then passed on to his successor, Umar. But it was during the caliphate of Uthman that the final, official version of the Quran was established and distributed to the Muslims in different parts of the new empire. From the lips to the pen. In Muhammad's time, oral poetry was prized. Most people were illiterate, but they memorized long tales with beautiful language, adding to and adapting them down the generations. That ability to memorize is why so many could learn the Quran by heart. But as Abu Bakr realized, the times became too dangerous for the holy book to live only in people's heads. Once the Quran was written down, people wanted to make it as beautiful as possible. Over time, calligraphy, the art of decorative handwriting, became the most important Islamic art. Calligraphy was not only used for the page, you can see it decorating the walls and roofs of mosques and on bowls and vases. Great calligraphers became famous and set up schools of their own. Some could even create writing in the shape of animals. So there's some beautiful calligraphy. And this is a page from the Quran. And there is an illustration from the Battle of the Camel. Oh, and that's where we'll stop right there. All right, good job, kiddos.